let's go. Heidi Love in the house, dropping knowledge and facts, uncovering the truth, no need for acting lax. She ain't afraid to speak her mind, breaking through the lies, rising up with love, taking us to new highs. We're living in a world full of secrets and deceit, but Heidi's here to expose, bringing truth to the beast. She's got a message, spreading it far and wide, from addiction to hope. She's on the other side. Ooh, yeah.
Which was that he goes, look, very clear, the Bible, everything tells you that who's the Lord of this world? Who is in control of the material world?
Mhm.
It's Satan. All right.
Mhm.
That's it. It's made abundantly clear. You're told that. And therefore, all power and success in this world is dependent upon the God of this world. The God of the church is the God of the next world, this world.
Mhm.
And therefore, everything is determined by that. And all favors and all blessings and all disasters are accountable for that one purpose. So and I remember him saying is that every deal you make in your life in this world is a deal with the devil because he's the only one in control. That's kind of disturbing, but maybe he has a point.
Right. Yeah, I always go back to the story of Job. We know that God definitely can play a part, but also, he allows things. And we know that because if you believe in the Bible, the story of Job is very clear about this.
Oh,
So,
the story of Job is I think, is probably the most important story there. And I don't think people
yes.
generally get it. I'm not sure that I get it entirely. But, you were talking about things messing with you. Well, that's what happens to Job. He gets messed with.
Yes.
If you take the story at the basic level, the devil apparently works for God. They're kind of hanging out together, keep in mind. And the whole idea was the guy's going, "Oh, Job is, he just loves me, and
So
he does.
great.
Let's just
Check it out.
kill everybody in his family, and make his life as miserable as possible." And the whole thing is that Job sort of sticks with it. An interesting observation is that all of the collateral damage, all of the other people who are killed are not restored at the end.
No.
They're not returned to life. And all of this is just basically to test and torment. And then you got the whole question is that if God is omnipotent, wouldn't he have known this to begin with? Why would he have to have that demonstrated to him? This is getting way too into theology in this point.
Yes.
But it doesn't, it's an interesting way because it's such, you could almost interpret in some way that it's kind of lifting the veil on things.
Mm-hmm.
That people that you assume, or that people, but beings you assume that are antagonistic really aren't antagonistic. In fact, they're kind of working together to screw you over for no particular purpose other than just to prove some kind of bet between the two of them. To me, it's the ultimate expression of people being messed with by forces they don't understand for things that have no real reason to it. And I think it's also in Job where when Job at some point just gets angry to deserve this. And I think the answer he gets is that, well, I'm God. I can do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
I am what I am. And if I choose to give these things to you, you should be thankful. And if I take them away, there's nothing that you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, in a way, a kind of interesting, if you want to take it in a kind of allegorical level, it's again it kind of explains the precarious condition that we live in. Again, the world is a dangerous place. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that it will kill you. It kills everyone.
Mm-hmm. Nobody makes it out alive.
Nobody makes it out alive. So all the things you're given, okay, gradually we're being poisoned by food and water and air. All of those things sort of kind of take their toll.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dangerous world. It's a world in which, the way to put it is that life lives on death.
Mm-hmm.
Everything eats something else.
It's true.
So it's it's not a pleasant way to look at it because there's like puppies and flowers and all the rest of this thing, but all these things are killing and eating each other
Yeah.
And everything down. And no matter how fortunate you may be, they can all end
Hmm.
immediately. All right.
Oh yeah. In a
You could
blink
have
of an
all the money
eye.
in the world and then your helicopter goes down because that's
Hmm.
just the way these things are.
Hmm.
Um, and it was somebody once observed about Napoleon, and I think it's true for anybody else, is that, you know, why did Napoleon lose at Waterloo? And the simplest action, he lost at Waterloo because God got tired of it. Or the gods get, they kind of play with you for a while, elevate you up, and then it's just fun to watch them fall.
Yeah. I think it's
So,
all dependent on like your choices. Once again, like you said, some of these things are good and some are not good. And when you try to play with things that we don't clearly understand, we don't, I mean, how could we? Even with any knowledge that we've been granted, it's a drop in the bucket and half of it's hidden anyway in the Vatican. So, like, what do we really get to know? And
and
like you
then
said, it's best to not.
it comes back to the thing again about lying. And this is, I said that I tend to research a lot of people who lie about things, and it's often
Mhm.
surprising when they're not lying. And that's the kind of, from a kid, I've made things up. Okay. Um, and, I think, to put it this way is that, have I ever lied about something? And the answer would be that yes, whenever the lie served my interest better than the truth. All right.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably true for most people, I tend to suspect. Sometimes you need to do that. Now,
Mhm.
there's now apparently a term called sincericide, which is when you're too honest. No, no. If you want to turn yourself into a social pariah, just start telling the unbiased truth about things. Okay, telling
Oh
people
yeah.
what you really think. No, never do that because you need to you need to need to get along with people, and that's the only way that you're really going to be able to do that. It
Uh,
always
like
introduces this element of a certain degree of uncertainty about things. And that's what we're always trying to gauge as to whether this person is being, you know, it's not a question as to whether people are being honest or dishonest. It's just a question of what degree of honesty do you have?
or maybe why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we can
So,
understand someone saying, okay, if some guy comes up to you at work and says, "Hey, Rick, what's wrong with you today?" And you don't want to tell him about your personal life or some problem. You're going to say nothing. But
nothing.
like if you just vomited all your stuff onto him, like he's going to be like, "Oh my gosh, like what did he just do to me?" Like there are times where it calls for a simple answer, right? I mean, it would be uncomfortable otherwise.
Yes, just a kind of a acceptable, pleasant, dismissive answer some way, like nothing. There actually is somewhere there.
Yeah.
That's not really true, but yeah, it's about as much as you really need to have in that case.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it's
it's
uncomfortable. And personally, I think Crowley did that a lot of times. I think he was kind of a vomiter onto people. He would tell people things that were wild, and sometimes I think they were true, like you said, because I mean, I think he did have a lot of truth in him, and I think people didn't know what to do with it, right? Like, what do I do with this thing that he just told me? And then it's scary.
well, I think he probably appreciated the fact that telling the people the truth can often be much more disconcerting than telling them a lie.
Mhm.
Because the thing about a lie is that you can create it and control it. It's like a trick in magic. It's like a
Mhm.
trick that you've practiced. So the lie is a story which you've invented to explain something, and therefore you can manage all the different parts of it. And by the way, that's one of the handy things that you can sometimes use in detecting a lie, is because it's too good of a story. It's too
Right.
consistent. Okay, anybody who tells you something and they know all the little details, it's a lie. Because generally our recollections of things are kind of vague and our memories of them shift in one form or another. So the good story, the complete and detailed story is more likely the lie than the vague one, which people don't seem to have the full, because we're never really paying that much attention. Okay, nobody pays that
Right.
much attention to what's happening.
Unless you're creating an alibi.
Yeah, it's well, that's it. And
Mm,
that's the alibi. Um, it's also, the interrogator's trick of knowing that if you're interrogating someone and they keep telling you the same story again and again, and they've got all the parts, and they repeat the same story and it never changes, it's a lie because
mm.
they've rehearsed it.
Yes.
Someone, normally a person who's pressed about an event, a real event that they were with more elements, and it will change. That's one of the things
Right.
that you're looking for. So it's you're always kind of dealing with. I guess one of the reasons that I like studying pathological liars is that in some way they're a kind of interesting insight as to how many of them there are, and therefore how much of the stuff that the information that we have is made up.
Right.
It's a it's so I'm an historian, okay? I've actually got a piece of paper that says that I am, whatever that's worth, and it ain't much really. So I don't take it that seriously. But I did spend a lot of time and money to get that piece of paper, so that's what's important about
Hmm.
it. But one of the things that you have about history is that history is a narrative. A narrative is a kind of fancy academic word for a story. So here's what you've really got. If you want to look at historical facts, there aren't a lot of them. Simple example. I think everybody would pretty much agree that World War II actually happened. You might find some people who would doubt that, but they're crazy. Anyway, but World War II happened. And you can say, yeah, it began. It depends on where you were when it began, because now if you're in
Right.
China, it began in 1937. Europe is 1939. For the US, it began in 1941. But World War, sometime between the late 1930s and 1945, there was a thing called the Second World War, and which means there was a First World War. So that's real as well. So it happened, and you can mark certain, the Battle of Stalingrad began on this day and it ended on the other one, and this number of people were killed. Those are facts. They're mostly numbers and dates. Well, that's kind of the most important question. Why did World War II happen? Now, there you don't get facts, you get
Mm.
opinions. And all of the books that are written about everything in history are primarily opinions about the significance of the few facts that exist. And that's
Right.
essentially what historians do. Historians take the limited number of facts that are available and we try to explain them by embedding them in a story, of creating a script which incorporates them and explains them. The tricky part is that you can take the same set of facts and you can create different stories for them. You can embed those facts in a different narrative, but only one of those narratives could be true, which means if that's the case, then all the others must be false, but they make sense.
Right.
It's like the JFK assassination, okay? I think it's, I'll go along with the congressional investigation that argues that JFK was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. I think most
Mm.
people would accept. But which conspiracy? I mean, which of
Right.
the umpteen dozen versions of it? So, yeah, JFK is killed by a conspiracy. Well, who was it? Was it the mafia? Was it the Mossad? Was it the CIA? Was it who is it? And you can come up with all of these different versions that more or less explain what's happening. But keep in mind, almost all of them are lies, at
Right.
least in part. So we don't really know a whole lot. Even in terms of history, we don't really know a whole lot. And this, again, is why there's always more to be learned about Aleister Crowley. There's always more to be learned about World War II. There's always some part of the real narrative that we've never really figured out. No story is completely true. no story is complete, which makes work for people like me.
Right. Yeah, because they're not going to give us the truth in all these things. It only takes 100 years for everything to be forgotten, is what the saying is, right? Like 100 years changes so many things, and then you just have hearsay or books because people are dying. And so a generation to generation, these things can change, and I watched it happen in my own generation with the Mormon church, because when I grew up, I was told that Joseph Smith had the Urim and Thummim and the plates were right there. And that's how it was. And he was studiously writing. And now that's not the case. Now it's a rock and a hat. And the prophet put it on a couple months ago. And all of us that are older went, and here it is, right? The complete narrative change. Now that's just a tiny, minute thing in a silly, not silly, but in a religion, right? We're not talking about secret agents and government stuff and things that are so far beyond what we could truly understand, because it's meant to be secret. They're called secret societies for a reason, So,
And the thing that you keep secret is always ultimately what the society is about.
Yes. Yep. The end game, right?
There was an order. Well, they've now become a video game franchise, the Assassins. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And the Assassins really existed. They had nothing to do with hashish, and they were kind of a branch of Shiite Islam. Well, that's what their cover story was. There was something more to it, something behind that. They were pretending to be one thing while actually being something else. But what that something else is, but there's a document which itself, we're not really sure which is completely real or not. It's called the 9 Degrees of the Assassins. And it did appear, and it supposedly is the kind of manual for the kind of mind control training of the assassins. So remember, it's alleged to be this, but it's nevertheless interesting. So what the 9 Degrees of the Assassins are all about is that you work your way up from one level to another, 1 being the lowest, 9 being the highest. And, you start out at the beginning, presumably as a, fairly standard Shiite Muslim, let's say. The Quran is the revealed word of God. Muhammad is the prophet. We can hope, and Ali is his rightful successor. But what happens at each level of initiation is that something new is added. And usually, certainly by the time you get into the middle ranks of it, you're told that what you were told at earlier stages isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the stuff we told you before, well, that's not really it. This is what you have to believe. And what you notice, whether the document is the real Degrees of the Assassins or something someone thought up and claimed was, it's a pretty masterful work of psychological manipulation, because it gradually does is it takes someone with a set of beliefs and it just dismantles those as you go through. And what you ostensibly learn at the highest degree is that there's nothing. Okay? Nothing is real. Everything is, that's the math. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. There's not even necessarily any God. There's just your existence.
Right.
And it's and part of this it wasn't just about training assassins. It was about training the whole way that people would think. But one of the appeals to this from someone who was going to go become an assassin, was going to commit murder, and in the process themselves die, the idea of martyrdom, of sacrificing your life, is that, well, why would I want to do that if you've just told me that there's not going to be any kind of paradise with 72
All the
virgins?
virgins.
Okay. If I don't get anything out of it, and they go, oh no, you're missing it. The whole thing is that there's none of that. It means that the world only exists in you, and that when you die, the whole universe dies with you
Mm.
because you're the only reality, and thus you become the annihilator of worlds in sacrificing yourself. The whole universe dies with you. Now, that's the biggest con job of all time because it really
Yeah.
doesn't. Everybody else is going to go on breathing and eating when you're a corpse. But the mere fact that you could, and through this process, convince someone to kill themselves as an act of
Mm.
vanity, which is what it becomes, is to me just one of the. It's a kind of masterpiece of psychological manipulation,
Hmm.
and it doesn't work on everyone, but it works on most of them. But it's this process, this continual kind of peeling away that you have to be kind of gradually eased into this thing. So we're going to start out telling you one story, then we're going to change it, then we're going to change it a little bit more. And by the time we get to the end, it's going to be a completely different story. But by that
Mm.
time, you're fully committed.
Well, you have to be. It's like Scientology. By the time you understand about what is it, Zeta or some such
Xenu
thing.
and
Yeah, like you've spent money, it's your family. Same thing with Mormonism. Everything's entangled. You're fully immersed. And if you give up now, what's gonna happen? Right? I mean, I can tell you for me, I lost my family. I can tell you I don't have a community. My kids can't play with other people's kids. Like you lose this important thing, and you have to, for some people, like you said, it doesn't work for everyone, but for some of us, that's enough. Like for some of us, the truth is more important than the group think, right? Like it's not for everyone, and I understand it's a scary concept, like really not knowing too. You have no idea what's going to happen until it
you see the whole
happens.
end and you find out it's a flying saucer cult.
Yeah.
Because isn't
And
that, isn't like,
I'm
God an alien living on the planet Kolob?
yes,
Okay. And
Kolob, and yeah, and we were also supposed to just be, well, and the funny thing is like you are God. Now you
yeah,
can go create your own planets,
we need all
and
those
and the
wives.
women,
Yeah.
yeah, and the women are just servants and all this other stuff. And I'm like, this just sounds like a bad idea. I mean, but it sounds very similar to the Virgin story. I'll give them that. I
It's
mean, it's like a
well,
mix of the two. Yeah.
yeah, and Scientology, it's like Lord
Mhm.
Xenu, and you're all possessed by the ghosts of dead aliens. See, what Scientology is that it's a high-tech exorcism.
Yeah.
That's what it's doing, okay? Because there are all these dead aliens, and they're all their little ghosts have attached themselves to, and they're all the sources of your problems. Not you. It's always something else. And we're going to go through this with this, Mickey Mouse machine, and we're going to get all the ghosts off. I mean, if you tried to sell them that at the beginning, it wouldn't
Oh,
work.
yeah.
Now you have to go through
No.
all the other stuff, and then the big reveal. Ah, well, it's space alien ghosts. Well, I mean, to me, what that sounds like is a bad big. It's a bad sci-fi movie.
It's a bad
And
acid trip.
yeah, but
Her mushrooms or something.
you
Something
know,
happened.
I sometimes
Uh,
wonder what people can't be convinced of on some level, and it's.
it's true.
But that again is why I think you end up with so much of this stuff, which is really just sort of outright cons because
Hmm.
it's relatively easy to do. I mean, like,
Yeah.
all you have to do is just to claim that, you know, you're hearing voices in your head. This is the other thing is that, essentially, and again, that most religions are based upon someone at some point hearing voices in their head. All right.
Hmm.
So whether it's the Old Testament prophets, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Joan of Arc, whether it's Joseph Smith, they're hearing voices in their head and they're seeing things. So
Right.
they're seeing things and they're having voices in their head. You can add in little novel things like, magic rocks and hats and the whole thing, but it sounds like a story that someone would make up, which is what they're doing.
Right.
Okay. And I'm trying to so, but I think it's sounds like BS to me. But beyond that. Because, and that's the thing that I often look at it is that, like, couldn't you come up with a more convincing story?
That's why I think it's half and half, because it has to be halfway true to start it because it's so ridiculous. And then they fill in the blanks.
Well,
Much like the Ouija board, we know there's something out there, but
yeah, yeah,
what do you do with
I think
that?
you're
And
right. I
then
think part of it is that people have experiences that they otherwise can't. Yeah, this is kind of making
it's
excuses in some ways,
unexplainable.
but
Yeah.
part of it is kind of unexplainable. And so you have to come up with some story that would make sense out of it, because you're not really
You got to
sure
fix it. You
what's
can't tell your
happened to
mother
you.
that.
So, I don't know. Which always you have to make it sound better than I just heard this voice in my head and it told me to do something. Now, see, there's
Yeah,
one of
no.
if someone says they're hearing voices in their head, they're either a madman or they're a prophet. I mean, that's pretty much it.
Well,
And it
or
works.
they've been playing with something they shouldn't have, which is also, I think, why there is always deception behind it. Because if he did say, I went and channeled something, much like if I had told my mom we touched a Ouija board, we would be in deep trouble here. Like, I would have to explain some things. I don't want to explain what we were up to. So, of course, you want to make it better than it is, right? Like, you cannot just come in hot like that. That sounds
So let's
bad.
throw flying saucers into it, and that'll do it.
Yes,
There we go.
definitely.
I mean,
And
it's
and I think a lot of times these people are miserable at the end because I look at Crowley's life. If they make it to the end, let's put that little conjecture in there. Crowley was one of the lucky ones who got to actually age. Most of them die young,
he
are
wasn't,
martyred, whatnot.
terribly
But
ill. He could have lived
yeah, I
another.
mean, at least he made it somewhat. And he was so miserable at the end. I'm like, that poor addicted, like all these things, but why? I mean,
He'd been
from a fantastic life to that.
he'd been abandoned by. I mean, he had very few followers at the end. I mean, the only
Mhm.
organized element of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which wasn't even an organization he created. He just kind of stole it, but he just kind of
From the
took it over.
Golden Dawn and made him
Just
mad.
declared himself to
Yeah.
be the head of it, and some people accepted it and some didn't. But um, was the Agape Lodge in Los Angeles that Jack Parsons? That was the kind of only organized lodge of the whole thing, and that had. I've looked into that. There's a fairly good history of the Agape Lodge, and if you look through the people who are in it, they're pretty much just nobodies. I
Mhm.
mean, the guy who was his Wilfred Smith, who was the head of the lodge for years, the guy who served Crowley quite loyally and tried to do the best he could to organize this. I mean, he was an accountant for the Southern California Gas Company. Okay, and that's nothing against accountants for the Southern California Gas Company, but if anybody thinks that the OTO was full of all kinds of Hollywood producers and important, no, there's none of them there. There's nobody there of any social or economic significance whatsoever. They're pretty.
Mhm.
The other one is a woman who teaches, acting and music classes at LA Community College. All right, that's her claim to fame.
How does it survive? It's so amazing to
It
me,
kind of that's when they got Jack Parsons involved. That was like the most important person that they ever thought they had. One, he was relatively young. They were all kind of aging, and he might be able to carry it on. But then he quit. He's only associated with it for a while. He gets fed up with the whole thing and walks away to do
Mhm.
something else.
To blow himself up.
Yes, to blow
Oh
himself up.
boy.
You know, and all of
Maybe.
the other stories aside, that's almost certainly what he did. I mean, he worked regularly
Maybe.
with explosives, and he was kind of careless around them, and accidents happen or whatever. But Crowley had, for a whole life of striving for the things he was doing, and he did take what he was doing seriously. He had very little to show for it. I mean,
Yeah.
Thelema had not conquered the world. Nobody embraced it. The number of followers he had continually diminished, diminished, diminished. He was basically living on a dole from the intelligence service, from the Admiralty, and he's hopelessly addicted to heroin, which he originally started using to try to deal with asthma. Who knew that they
Mm.
used heroin to treat asthma? And apparently it worked on asthma.
Ooh.
So there you go.
Wow. Interesting. I'm an asthmatic. I
Well,
will not be using the
I
heroin.
wouldn't say that probably isn't too often used as a cure, but that's what they give you in
Yeah.
the old days. Kids got
Yeah.
asthma, give him heroin. So,
Seems like a good idea.
which means you always have to you even have to wonder about medical advice, because with the best
Mhm.
intentions of the world, people have been given lots of stuff that proved to be, really not such good advice.
Mhm.
And even that
It's
is
just like what you said about how we have a certain idea of things, but then something could become declassified. It's the same thing with the medical thing, because we think this until, oh, oops, just kidding. That was a terrible idea. Take the cocaine out of Coca-Cola.
or put
What?
it back in. I don't know. I mean, that was no. It's I no longer pay much attention to medical fads that come along, but you should have oat bran. Oat bran is the best thing for you ever. Or it should. I'm waiting until the next study shows that cigarettes are actually good for you. So
Well,
that would be a hard
I'll,
sell.
I'll tell you a funny sell on that one is during the thing from 2020 that will never go away. The smokers who were projected to die horrifically and be attacked by that because of it being a lung compromising situation actually fared much better than those that were healthy.
I knew it would just be. I'm not a
Funny
smoker,
enough.
never have been, but
No.
it gets so thoroughly demonized that
Mm-hmm.
to the point of, like, if you smoke one cigarette, you're doomed. That's it. Okay. Um, that was, I know that's not quite the case, because my dad smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day for 50 years
mm-hmm.
without, I'm sure it affected him in some way. But let's put it this way: he didn't die of lung cancer or of emphysema or any of these other things. Um, on the other hand, my mom, who never smoked a cigarette a day in her life, is the one that died of lung cancer.
Right.
Okay, people go, well, it's all that secondhand smoke. Well, but the guy who was getting the firsthand smoke didn't kill him. So you
Mm-hmm.
just can't really,
It's wild. Yeah,
and
it's all about like studies that they will never do because they're not ethical.
I see way too many people who, go on, are very much into eating healthy and
Yeah.
doing all of this stuff and running all the time. And I've known more than one avid jogger who has essentially died while jogging at a relatively
Wow.
early age.
That's
And so
yeah.
that didn't work out the way
You
they
never know. Yeah, because even now I know multiple people on the carnivore diet where it's all meat and butter and fat, and their cholesterol was sky high and it has plummeted and actually helped cure them. The thing that's so demonized, which is, I mean, that's funny to me. It's like, huh,
If you think
okay.
about it, I would say logically, but I don't know what that is. And let's put it this way: the basic reality is that in the real world, and kind of the natural world, not unlike the one we think we live in, you know what the best diet is? Anything you can eat.
Yeah.
Because the basic situation for most human beings who have ever lived anywhere at any time was simply trying not to starve to death, which meant that
Right.
any calories you could get were the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just can't believe that we're that specialized. I don't think there's some sort of perfect human diet.
No.
It's,
No.
our problem is we have too much stuff available to us. So we
Or
eat it
we've
all
tainted it all, right? Like it's all poisoned. I mean, they've
the time.
changed it all. I mean, and whether it was inadvertent or advertent, there's so many chemicals that it's, I mean, even in Napa Valley, where it's supposed to be these certain wineries that have the most organic everything, there's still traces of harmful chemicals. And it's just part of that we didn't know. whether or not it's malicious, like it's affecting us now, because things stay in soil, things stay in, I mean, who knew, right?
No, see, that
It's
was
just,
all. It increases the crop yield, and yet it subtly poisons you as you go. So we should all just keep eating
Mhm.
rotten meat. Okay,
No,
it's
yeah,
just then you just have to deal with
yeah,
bacteria poop to make you sick.
yeah.
So at any it reduced down to a basic placed back into a simple natural solution. You'll eat whatever is available, and you'll thank God you got that,
Yeah,
or the devil, whichever
exactly.
whoever you want to thank for that. That
Yeah.
there's some sort of perfect diet, and if you eat this, you're going to live forever, which you won't,
Mm-mm.
or you're going to live longer, but no real guarantee in that either. You
I
know,
think that these things that are fast and popular, even though I mentioned the meat diet thing, um, they're not sustainable, right? If remove all sugar, remove all this, remove all that, don't ever eat carbs, do this, do that. Anything that seems really drastic probably isn't smart. That's my best advice. Like, be wise. If you want a piece of chocolate, then that's okay. If you consistently eat 5 chocolate bars a day, you're going to have a problem. I mean, that's anything. That's anything, right? Like moderation,
enjoy
water.
every sandwich. I think that's
Yes.
uh, any kind of food that you have is well. I think you can see this. You see a show called Naked and Afraid?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I never understood the naked part, but at any rate, I mean, why that's necessary. But you send these people out there, and you got 21 days, and first of all, you have to figure out that most things don't like to be eaten, therefore,
Mhm.
you're there's not a lot of food. It's not like a smorgasbord that you just go out and find stuff unless you're very lucky. But what people do is they spend 21 days basically starving,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
they become increasingly less and less discriminating about what they'll eat. If all you can find are icky snails, then those snails are the choice between
They're
you
starting to look good. Yeah,
and
they're
dying.
starting to look good.
So it's the choice. Sometimes the survival choice in terms of drinking water, out of a dirty pool.
Yeah.
Well, if your choice is drinking the possibly contaminated water and getting diarrhea in a few days, or dying from
Mhm.
dehydration, then you're better off drinking any water that you can find and dealing with the consequences, which hopefully will be less than death.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the naked part is psychological. I think they do that to mess with them, kind of back to this whole thing. What we've been talking about is all psychological operations, right? And the people at the top that know the things, like there's a reason why there's magical schools, these things where people go to be educated, especially upper echelon people. They know things that we don't figure out till later, right? And this is part of that, this psychological programming, operations, how people work, how people think. They have an upper hand than the middle class, of course, you know. So it
There's
goes
certainly
back to that.
various levels of manipulation. Um, I'm not necessarily convinced that they do that because they actually know more other than techniques, or that what they're trying to disguise is that they don't know.
Yeah. Or
Um,
maybe it's just the fact it's hidden and they don't want to share. I mean, if you had something great, chances are you're not like a wonderful, your grandma's favorite recipe. She's not going to put it out for everybody. She's going to select the few people she chooses to share that with, you know?
well, that's the come on for every secret society, is that they're all selective. That's if you want to figure
Mhm.
out, is this a secret society? Well, is it membership by invitation only? And then, of
Mhm.
course, you get this ego stroke of saying, you see, you've been, see, it's just like those angels showing up and say, you've been chosen for a great purpose. Um,
Mhm.
you've been chosen to be part of this, and this is what makes it so special. I mean, we
Yeah.
always go for that. I mean, what makes a college degree from Harvard or Yale more valuable than others isn't the fact that you actually get a superior education. Not really. I mean, a basic class in English literature is pretty much the same at one college or another. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not good. You're not going to learn anything very differently. And you can have good or bad professors at one place or another. Now, what you're paying for at Yale or Harvard is the brand name of the degree.
Yes.
And that brand name is based upon its exclusivity. So when you only accept 6% of applicants, it's a special club. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what the whole value is based on, not the education itself, but upon the selectivity of the institution offering it.
Absolutely. I agree. It's all about branding, and they've put that over into so many things, and we see it to this day. And I think a lot of it has to do still, the symbolism is also prevalent in worship of certain gods and different things. And if you're wise, you can see it. Does it have power? We get back to that again. That depends on what you've put into it. Once again, we get back to, was Crowley like magical, or did he know something mental, right? Or whatever. But at the end of his life, I think he was so misunderstood and so like, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. Like, to live high on the hog, to have every brand name, to do all the big things and die like he did. I just don't know if that's worth it,
And yet posthumously, he's much more famous today than I think at any point when he was alive.
True.
He became this kind of he became a hero of the 60s counterculture because he was transgressive, because he seemed to be a rebel. Okay. He was,
Right.
anything that square society disliked and despised, therefore had to be good. Although I suspect that if Aleister Crowley had been, revived or had lived on and had actually witnessed the swinging 60s and everything that came with it, he would have despised it.
Yeah. Because it became the norm, right?
If you look at his tastes in things like literature, clothes, anything else, they're essentially the tastes of a fairly conservative Englishman, which he admitted to be. At some point he admitted that what his alternate identity was, or what his was to be a kind of English squire.
Right.
And part of him, I think the Edward Alexander Crowley part of him always was in that way. It was he gave and it was in reference again to his sort of apparently activities in World War One. Actually, I think prior to that, he gave a kind of interesting view on patriotism. And he was basically challenged by someone as how a man like him, who seemed to despise all conventional morals, how he could anyway be a patriot. And Crowley's response, and I'm going to paraphrase, he said it much better than I'm going to say it. He goes, I don't believe for 1 minute that the English pot is any less black than the German kettle. So, in other words, I don't actually believe that England has any moral superiority over its enemies.
Right.
But he said, my loyalty is the loyalty of Bill Sykes' dog. Old Dickensian references. My master beats me and starves me, but he is my master and I love him.
Mm.
So it was this kind of, that for him, patriotism to England wasn't something that he did because he thought that England was the greatest nation on earth, or that it was morally superior, or was chosen by God to do anything. But it was simply because he was an Englishman. He couldn't be anything otherwise. And therefore, there was this basic unbreakable bond between him and the country. And that's what his loyalty was. He actually argued in a way that was a superior loyalty because, in his view, the loyalty of Bill Sykes' dog is based upon love. It's based upon this emotional connection. Whereas if your loyalty to your country rests upon your belief that it is morally superior to all others, well, then what happens to that if some inconvenient fact comes along to convince you that it's not? That in fact that your country does immoral and wicked things, well, then you'll turn against it.
Mm-hmm.
That someone who never believes, for whom that's not a consideration, can never be turned against it in that way. And that his, in a
Right.
way, was the only kind of loyalty which was permanent and genuine. Now, that's the Crowleyan aspect on it. But again, without saying that he was absolutely right, he has a point that is worth being
Mm.
considered.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Many of us are in those same situations with patriotism or other things in families, whatever the case may be. And I could see that. Yeah. But
Well, the families, I think, are the you can't do anything about those.
yeah.
And I can't say I've ever had any serious differences with anybody
Mm-hmm.
in my family in one form or another. Um, but some people do. Some people have terrible
Mm-hmm.
families. But it's just one of those things. But still, you're usually, you know, trapped into this kind of emotional tangle of one things or another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, people who, on the one hand, love their mothers, but also in some way hate them at the same time, and can't figure out which of those is the most likely. Which, led somebody, it wasn't Crowley, but it's somebody to argue that the most blessed of all are those who are orphans. Those who have, you don't know what you're being, you obviously that's not necessarily the case, but there's always a trade-off. So
Right. It's less
there are all
complicated.
the things that you're missing by family life, but then there are other things that you're being spared by not having that either.
Mm-hmm.
There are all sorts of disappointment and pain that you won't know because you can't be disappointed by parents you don't have.
True.
This is stress.
What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about Crowley?
Well, I think I said earlier that his reputation for wickedness is exaggerated, which he helped, spread to some degree. He's often accounted. This is one of the things is that that Crowley was a Satanist, and I don't think by any stretch of the well, you have to get into defining then what's a Satanist. Well, it's someone who worships Satan, but that takes a lot of different forms in terms of what that is. So you've got well, let's take really the most famous Satanist in recent times, which is Anton LaVey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, he founded the Church of Satan, right? So he's got it, and he dressed up in his whole sort of, weirdo Billy Munster ripoff thing. I mean, look, Anton LaVey would show up wearing, a cap with horns on it, carrying a pitchfork. Well, that tells you right. LaVey did not believe in Satan as an actual being. He thought it was a lifestyle. He thought it was a kind of performance art. He's putting you on. Okay, it's just this. It was a way to attract people in. They would think they were doing something that was cool and transgressive. That's what attracted a lot of Hollywood and other people to it. Because I went to the satanic church and had a satanic play. LaVey was a con man.
Right.
And he was running this kind of role playing. I think that's what the term has now become. This kind of role playing thing that he was doing, and he never really took part of it seriously. To him it was the most he closest he got to that was arguing that Satanism basically boiled down to enlightened self-interest. That's a big screw. But there were people who joined the Church of Satan and thought they were actually going to worship the devil, and then found out that it was just a bunch of silly role playing. It was a kind of a permanent Halloween party.
Hmm.
Well, that didn't satisfy them. So those people, like, say, Michael Aquino, broke away and formed their own church where they were really going to worship Satan, except they couldn't call him Satan because apparently LaVey had a pretty good sort of trademark thing about Church of Satan. That's kind of, that you can trademark the devil. Who knew? Anyway, so see, LaVey, if you tried to form a rival Church of Satan, wouldn't come after you with a curse. He'd come after you with lawyers, which are even more dangerous. So,
Oh boy.
so Aquino, then the others break away, and they founded their Temple of Set. Okay, and they only came up with that name because Church of Satan was taken. Let's face it, they wouldn't have done that otherwise. But then things get sort of deep, and then apparently they could go about worshiping their own kind of evil being. Except, here's the thing, and many people know, is that Michael Aquino, well, his hobby was running a quasi-satanic cult. But what was his day job? What was his lifetime profession? Well, he was a U.S. Army officer. And what was his specialty? Psychological operations. Now, you got to think about it. Psychological operations officer in his spare time runs a quasi-satanic cult. Is there some connection?
No connection. No connection.
No connection at all. No. Couldn't be. No, I would argue that yes, there's a connection. Yes, there's an obvious connection.
I'm teasing.
No, I know, but yes, it's not just a coincidence in one form or another. So, was even that real? Okay, was Aquino's? Here you've got a cult that supposedly breaks away from a phony satanic cult to be a real satanic cult, and yet it's run with what apparently seems to be which may not be real either. So the disappointment would be is that if you really wanted to worship the devil, you'd kind of be out of luck in both circumstances. Both of them are fakes. They're not what it is that they pretend to be. You're just being manipulated.
Right.
So what else is new?
You think that Crowley worshipped anything like that, or do you think he was playing the role?
No, Crowley would have disapproved of Satanism per se. One, because he would think it was a very narrow way of,
But his magic is what I mean, like his worship.
Magic is just it's a tool. It's a methodology, and it's a state of mind more than anything else. So and you can get into this thing called magical thinking, and there are different ways about it. But here's one way you can think of. I'm saying the only way. In the concept of magical thinking and a kind of magical concept of reality, one of the first things you have to do is to put aside the idea that there are any such things as accidents or coincidences. Everything is an omen of something. Okay. The other way to put it, everything that happens is an omen, which means that everything that happens is related to other things. You're constantly, there are always little messages that are, the idea is that, the world, the universe, I don't know, the spirits, whatever they are always talking to you. It's just that you never shut up and listen. And they're always talking to you through the things that happen, through the everyday. So the fact that you're sitting on a park bench eating your lunch and two crows come and sit on a fence across from you, that means something. Everything that happens to you has some kind of meaning. It can be a little meaning or it could be greater meaning. Now, here's a challenge, listeners out there, if you want to try to experiment with magical thinking. You have to get up in the morning and go through your day, and you have to pay close attention to everything that happens. And you have to think that everything that happens, no matter how small or inconsequential, the arrangement of everything, the appearance and disappearance of everything has a meaning. Everything is significant. There are no accidents. There are no coincidences. Every action, everything has meaning. Well, one of the things you're going to find is if you try to keep up the thinking is that your whole approach to your everyday life is going to change because you're going to be constantly looking and thinking and rethinking about what's happening. So what does that mean? Every action has meaning. What does it mean that the two crows came and sat on the fence across me when I was eating lunch? What was, it's never really it never really comes with a caption. You just kind of have to figure this out for yourself. And how do all of these things sort of put together? So that can be, I've tried that on occasion. I can only keep it up for so long, but it creates a kind of mental state which I wouldn't say is paranoia, but it's similar to that. In other words, it's becoming sort of hyper aware of everything which is happening. And it was, this was something I was trying. I can give you an example, and it's one of those things that still kind of troubles me because I don't know quite what to make out of it. And I think something happened, but I'm not sure what. So, I haven't done it recently, but I was a kind of avid bike rider. Not long distance things, but I would go out on, most days I'd go out on a bike ride. And there was a particular place, living in beautiful northern Idaho. I can ride a few miles and I'm out of town, under the trees and fields. And so there was a particular place that I would ride out to. And it was this very sort of beautiful, bucolic setting. And I just liked riding out there. And that's where I would turn around and go back. And I just kind of liked being there. It had a particular numinous quality to it, which meant that, I don't know, I just kind of liked the place. I don't know, maybe there were fairies living in the woods or something. Who knows? I didn't try to overthink it, but I sort of liked going there. And it was very common when I went out there for animals, particularly deer. There always seemed to be a lot of deer around. And the deer would behave, they were fairly bold. They weren't really afraid, and they would just kind of stand and look at you. They wouldn't come close, they wouldn't run away, but they would just kind of stand there and look at you. So that had gone, I'd done that for, a couple of years, and it was all sort of the same thing. And then one day, as I'm riding out there, there is a fawn, a baby deer, not the other kind, just torn apart. It's just like mangled in the middle of the road. It's like this fawn that's just been torn apart by something. Well, nature is as nature does. So I didn't think too much about that. But that was kind of the first thing. And then what I began noticing all along the ride I would go is that there were dead animals. I mean, badgers, raccoons, and you'd run across those every now and then, but it was like every ride I went on, there were more and more dead animals. And then at this place that I would stop, there was a dead deer. And it wasn't shot or mangled, it was just dead. It was just lying there. And then a couple of days later, there were a bunch of dead deer. Like this whole deer head was dead, and they were just lying in this field. And that made the whole thing kind of unpleasant. So I changed my route and I didn't go there. But on the route, at every place I would go, there were dead animals. There was a deer who was hit, there was something, there was a cat that was run over, and I couldn't really escape it. And it's one of those circumstances where something occurs and it keeps occurring in a particular cycle that just becomes unnerving after a while. Well, that kind of put me off, bike riding for a while. And so that's what began. And that probably evolved over the case of, really a few weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks. And then the next thing that happened was that one of my dogs just suddenly died. Literally, I remember on a Thursday, she was perfectly healthy. By Sunday, she was dead.
Wow.
Turned out she has some sort of congenital problem, but that was just like that. And then that was all a prequel to a trip my wife and I were taking to Ecuador. It was a tour we were going to be on. And so it was like a week after the dog died, we left on this trip. And that's a long story in itself. But suffice to say that on that trip, I had a medical emergency and I almost died. I'm ending up having emergency abdominal surgery in a hospital in the Amazon.
Oh, Lordy.
And, I eventually, I survived that and got out of it. And And I don't know to what degree. So here's the thing. I wondered, the thing that's gone over my mind was all of this, this idea that everything is an omen, was all of this sort of these constant death that I was experiencing, was that some sort of warning? I mean, I don't know how you can warn you for something you don't expect.
Right.
There's no way. But was that some sort of omen of danger to come? Or another interpretation, was it hostile?
Mm,
And that's the
yeah.
question. Was I being shown something to warn me, or was I being shown something to threaten me?
Mm, yeah.
Or
I mean,
was
and
it
it's
just,
hard to know. Or
or am
was it
I
a
just making
coincidence?
out something out of it that isn't really there? Am I seeing connections that don't? See, this is, it's this whole, question about pareidolia, the idea that you see patterns in things that don't exist. Well, I don't know how that works, because if you see the pattern, then it exists. The
Hmm.
question is whether or not the pattern has any real significance. So when you tell
Yes.
someone that, well, you're experiencing pareidolia, you're just seeing patterns that aren't real, that's not what's
Hmm.
happening. They are seeing a pattern. You're simply
Well, it's
arguing that
like saying there's no power in gematria. However, we know that there's a lot of things that can't be explained that circle around gematria.
well,
Same,
it's
you know.
so my sort of experience with all the den animals and stuff is that, I admit on the one hand that I may be making something out of this that isn't there, but my
Hmm.
gut instinct is that no,
Mm.
it's not coincidental.
What has happened with us as a society, and I think it was on purpose, back to the psyops, is you here, especially in other countries, it's not quite like this, but they have made us a 3-second retention society that doesn't want to learn and doesn't want you to explore your world around you, first of all, right? So put your crap away and get away from exactly what you were doing, get away from society or whatever. Also, they've gotten rid of philosophy, right? How often, other than podcasts, which were kind of a weird niche, okay, um, or teachers, I think teachers might actually have these conversations on a regular, but how often do you sit down and do what we're doing right now? And we're talking about things and we're saying, oh, what about this and conjecture and processing, and we may get nowhere, but we're talking about it. So, okay, there's that. And then they've gotten rid of that for the most part. And then you've got a lot of ADHD and different things like that, which, hey, I have some of that. I get it. I see shiny things and I'm all over the place too. But I'm just saying they used to teach people to harness it in, and then not to trust your gut, right? Like your internal, we have like an internal thing minus my Christianity or lack of a Christianity for someone else. We have a warning thing inside us, like we do, because I've seen it at my job and I've seen it with people that say, I just had a bad feeling about blah, 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 and I almost got smashed by a car. Okay. So these paying attention to the crows around us or whatever is happening. And so they've minused all these things out, and no wonder we're so lost, right? No wonder this society has no idea what to do. No,
Except watching
and it's
YouTube
not their
videos.
fault. Yeah, it's not their
No,
fault.
I
And
think there's, yeah.
I think there's something to it. In my opinion, I think there's something to it because I believe in things like that. Just like we go back to the Ouija board, I believe that there can be good warnings, that it could be either or. For you, you'll know the answer because it's internal inside you, whether it was hostile or warning, right? Like you have the answer inside you because you know the feeling you felt when you saw that and came upon it. And my guess, probably hostile because of the depth of destruction involved in it. But also, people have such an ability now, even though this happened to you on multiple occasions, to just say, I don't know, it wasn't anything, because it's so hard to believe that it could be. Right. It's a
Wasn't
terrifying thing.
there's a there's an old story that supposedly is told in intelligence circles. Okay, so here we go. And story goes something like this. It's a freezing winter somewhere in Siberia. A poor peasant named Ivan is trudging through the snow back to his humble cabin. And he hears a bird chirping. And he sees that there's like this ptarmigan or something in the snow, and it's freezing to death and it's about to die. He looks at it, sort of takes pity on it. He looks around in the field and sees that there's a big steaming cow patty sitting over there. So he picks up the bird and he goes over and he sticks it in the cow shed. And he walks away. And a little while later, another peasant, also named Ivan, comes through and he hears this, the bird sort of, beginning to warm up and chirp more and make more noise. He comes over and he sees this bird sitting in a cow pie, and he pulls it out, wrings its neck, and takes it home for dinner. So, what lessons do we learn from this story? One, the person who dumps you in shit may not necessarily be your enemy. The
Right.
person who gets you out of shit may not be your friend. And if you ever find yourself in shit, keep your mouth shut.
So true. So true. Because, you never know what the intention is behind, right?
Yeah.
Like exactly that. And this is the kind of things, and I like to go long form conversation on my stuff. I've loved this conversation because we've gotten into so many great things. And I think that if people would take time to do that, like we're virtually strangers. Like you didn't know me, I didn't know you, I know your work, but look at how many connections and things that we had to talk about, right? People don't connect enough, but also when they do, they sometimes try to sound the alarm on different things, right? Learn from things, definitely take it in, but don't always share what's internal to you unless you feel you really should, basically, with that story. But not to shy away from the learning process, because I think that it's so overlooked. It has gotten to the point where people demonize learning, and it happens from infancy. And I think it is pre-programmed, because like take math, for example, not that I'm some scholar, because I'm certainly not, but you hear kids say they hate math before they have a chance to hate math because their parents hate math, right? Like this is like a hand-me-down thing. And then you have people that don't even want to try. And then you introduce Common Core, which makes no sense. So then people go, I don't want to learn that. It makes no sense. So they've done this to our country in particular to dumb us down and to make us be removed from certain things, because what are numbers, to go back to your point? A lot of times they're patterns. And what did John Dee say was the language of angels? It was math. He was the mathematician.
Because
He was,
there's a lot of, mystical, you can put it this way. There's a whole mystical side to mathematics, which is numbers do strange things. I'm not a math person at all.
I'm not.
And by the way, I'm one of those kids who hated math.
I'm not good at it.
Well, it was always one of those things that the counselors would go, well, according to your tests, you should be a whiz at math. Well, it was just my bad attitude. I will admit that. But it was everything. Numbers become the basic things, the basic symbols by which everything can be expressed. And I can now appreciate that much about it. And in other words, it's not, you can use them, you can use numbers just to add up figures. Okay. You can use numbers to keep accounts, but that's not what they're there for. No real mathematician would ever say that numbers are simply matters of keeping accounts. Numbers are an abstract, they're a kind of symbolic expression of reality on some very basic scale. And there are things that we can understand through numbers that we can't see, that we can't touch, that we can't parse in any other way. But the numbers tell us that this exists.
Right.
And they become a
Right.
kind of other form of symbolic reality, I suppose.
Well, and they wouldn't mess with it. It didn't matter, because what did they do with the Gregorian calendar? What was John Dee trying to do with the calendar? Like, all these little things that they do, they mean something, just like the crow, just like your situation. Like, all these little things mean something. And I've had this really weird life, which is why I do this podcast. And I didn't even ever mean to do a podcast. It was never my intention, nor my design. This was like put upon me pretty much by God, I feel. But I also am smart enough to understand that I have had all these really hard things happen to me. But if I keep them inside, and this is why it's called Unfiltered and rise, like rise above your situation. By all accounts, I should be on the corner selling drugs somewhere, or selling myself somewhere. It was a really bad situation over and over and over again from like infancy. And I could have easily given up and just gone, you know what? I'm a ward of the court. My dad's in prison. My mom's got all these problems. My grandma's this crazy Mormon. Meanwhile, my grandpa's a 1%er in a bikers club. And this is the people I'm looking up to. And, you know, all of my cousins, all of my family, not all, but a lot, are estranged or in severe addiction, have killed themselves. My brother died of an accidental overdose, like horrible situation, horrible. My oldest daughter estranged from me. Like, I have enough that I feel like I've lived maybe 10 lives. And I could keep that in and say, oh, woe is me. You know, look at this sad thing. Okay. That's not what I did. I was a child bride. I was 17. He was 25 and had a kid already, and I had a baby by the time I was 20. I could have easily not gone to school. I did. I kept fighting simply for the fact that I knew that this life, whether hard or easy, is something worth fighting for. That this life, whether hard or easy, is something that I must do to rise above it. Just, you can do hard things in it, and it sometimes is going to be the worst day of your life, but that's how life is. And my dad used to say, it is what it is, kid. And you know, that advice goes far when you get old enough to understand it, right? And when I did, and not that I'm some expert, just that part, that it is what it is, kid, part I understand. I decided I would share and be as raw as possible. And here it is, unfiltered for you, because if I can help one person with that, then that is the meaning, right? Like, you should do those things. You should make that difference. And obviously, as a teacher, I'm certain that you also feel that way, because you don't become a teacher if you don't. And, you know, these things can help people. This talk here may help people. Like, all these things can change certain things for other people and maybe help them have more than the 3-second retention rate and notice the crow. Like,
Yeah, a lot of it depends upon, you have to be in a situation where something will resonate with you or it won't. I mean, I would hope that people would at least find what we're talking about interesting and maybe thought-provoking. We're not trying to answer the great questions of the universe,
because we don't know.
They may not have any answers to them. That's the whole thing. But talking about things, anything, is almost always useful. And very often, the more people you can involve in a conversation, well, that's always a tricky type of thing. A lot of what you have to do, I'd say, within my experience and others that I've observed, is that a lot of the insight or revelations you're going to get, you have to pretty much do it on your own. Okay. You have to cross the abyss by yourself. You don't do that holding anybody else's hand. But on the other hand, it's in terms of sort of sharing those experiences with other people, that you can often, the main thing you'll get out of that is that you're not that unique, that there's almost nothing that you've experienced or thought about that someone else hasn't come up with before. And that can either be comforting or it can be disturbing in one way they look at it. But that's probably because that's the only way we've been taught to express these type of things. What I was describing earlier is magical thinking, is that it does force you to pay attention, to really sort of stop. It's again what might be called situational awareness, which is a kind of paranoia. Situational awareness is that you always pay attention to where you are and what's going on around you, and sit in the corner with your back, observing the front of the room, so you can see who comes in and out. In certain situations, that's what you want to do. Never sit where someone can sneak up behind you. Any animal will tell you that. Okay, that's just basic sense in some way. But it's and maybe that's what that boils down to. Maybe magical thinking in a way is just developing a sense of situational awareness about what's going on around you, and where you fit into it.
Yeah, no, I would agree. A sixth sense. My grandpa always used to call it a sixth sense. And, I think if anything, studying these things have value, mentally studying anything is great. But history is important, because his story and history is a very different thing. And history is written by the winners. And it's not always 100%. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that passes for history, since we were talking about lies, is lies. Either it never happened. It's the great rule of thirds, that you can take everything and you can divide them into three categories, and not necessarily equal in size, but three different categories. So in terms of history, you've got things that never happened, as described, or complete fiction, made up. On the other end, you've got things that are basically what were described. They're about as close to that. And in between, you have the biggest category, which is a combination of things that really happened, but are also partly made up. This mixture of the imaginary and the genuine. And that's what you're dealing with most of the time. But there is no great Encyclopedia Britannica. There is no huge books bound in human skin somewhere in a library that tell you everything that ever happened. That has never existed. History is basically a relatively small number of observable or demonstrable facts embedded in a huge matrix of story, most of which is made up, usually with an agenda.
Yes. Yep. And with that, I think we'll wrap up for today, because I would love to have you back, because I know you talk about another guy too that is pretty interesting, which I didn't catch a whole lot on, but you said that you really delve into, and I think he was another spy. Is that right? You wrote a book.
Sidney Riley?
Yes.
One of the, we were talking about somebody who was a pathological liar who never tells the truth. Yes, okay, there's one of them. And the
very interesting.
Anybody who's ever seen a series, a TV series from the 80s, British, called Riley Ace of Spies, which was the thing that got me interested in him, as along with other people. It's a great series to watch. It's got Sam Neill plays the central character. Nothing in that bears any real resemblance to the actual guy or what happened. That again is a real person. I mean, the characters in it are real, but the story has no resemblance to the facts at all. And the actual Riley didn't look like Sam Neill.
Big surprise.
The problem with that, it's the problem is that the good story almost always wins. So it isn't the truth, it's a good story. And people like a good story. So if the truth isn't as sexy as the good story, the story is going to carry, So do you want to have a Riley that looked like Sam Neill, or do you want to have the actual Riley who looked like Leonard Cohen? Okay, which of those is more appealing to you? Even though
Yeah.
The Leonard Cohen character is more. But yeah, that's an interesting case of where just a complete fabric of fiction was built around this character.
Wow.
But here's the question we could come back to: why? Why would everybody lie about him?
Hmm.
I'll tell you some other time.
Ooh. Yes, let's do it. I will definitely be getting in touch. This has been fascinating and also just a great discussion and on top of it. So
It's
uh,
been very enjoyable.
I've had fun. And will you let people know where to find all of your work? Because it's great.
Well, my books, Secret Agent 666, Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, if you're interested in the more technical side of things. Trust No One, The Secret World of Sidney Riley. Those are all available. I think the Riley book is out of print, but I think it's still accessible through Amazon. You can find it there. The first book I ever wrote, which was about an obscure Russian revolutionary named Boris Savinkov, you're out of luck on that one because
Oh no.
that's been out of print for a long time. And I have no immediate plans to reissue that. But I wish I'd saved like a book of a box of them because they're like worth $400 now. I never
Oh
made a penny
wow.
on that book.
Oh man.
So there are those, and then the other things I have. If you look around in journals or elsewhere, I've written a lot of articles on a whole variety of, I think, interesting historical subjects.
Mhm.
And then there are a lot of them are sort of historical murder mysteries in some way. I don't know. I should have been a Raymond Chandler, but anyway. But then
You
more
should
recently, a lot of my
republish those books. Yeah, republish that one if you can,
yeah,
like maybe vamp it and put it out in production again. I mean, ideas, just saying.
somewhere in the back. Well, I was actually rereading. It's kind of interesting to reread stuff that you've written and you haven't really looked at. And so I wrote the Savinkov book back in the early '90s, actually late '80s, early
Mhm.
'90s, and I was rereading part of it, and I was thinking, it sounds like a very vain thing, but I was reading, going, this isn't that bad. Look at this. No, it's actually pretty good. Um, and not so much that my writing was good, but that it's actually a pretty good
Right,
story. So,
right.
but then more recently, I've gotten more into the video thing because that's the way things are going. So, what you can look for is that if you go to the Great Courses,
Yes.
all you have to do is go the Great Courses, and you'll go there, and they produce a huge array of courses on everything from gardening and ballroom dancing and how to teach yourself Japanese, along with a lot of history courses. And mine are
Mm.
there. And there you will find the three courses I have so far, which is the real history of secret societies, crimes of the century, if you're into sort of historical true crime, and then the most recent one, secrets of the occult. And I am
Ooh.
working on another one now, which deals with historical villains, or some are more villainous than others. A lot of them you
Still
figure out just got screwed
awesome.
over. But and so that's something that I'm doing, and working on some, hopefully some different media projects that will pan out
Awesome.
in one
Well,
form or
this is
another.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is something to look forward to and possibly even maybe get that book out on Audible or some such thing. That would maybe be the way to go.
Yeah, the Crowley book may be on Audible. I'm not sure.
I mean, the one that's out of that you couldn't
Oh, the
get out
Savinkov book
again.
on Audible?
Yeah, yeah.
In the
You
great,
might
yeah.
be surprised.
Think of one more thing for me to do.
I'm
No,
sorry.
no, no, no. I feel like I shouldn't do that, but there's a kind of, you know, there's the great stove with things on the front
Yeah.
burners and on the back burners, and that's
You've
so
got
far
projects
definitely
cooking.
on the
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I can't wait for the ones that are in the front burner. It sounds like an amazing. And if you have any, I did find your link to the shows that you do have out. I'll put those in the show notes as well as the books. If you have any other links, please share them with me and I'll be happy to put them on there as well. Awesome. I will
Okay.
definitely be contacting you for round 2. This was fun.
All right. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.